Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Asia-Pacific Multi-Stakeholder Dialogue on Bodily Autonomy and Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights, SRHR. My name is Tamina Tausji, and I will be taking you through today's highly anticipated session. We truly hope that you will all leave this dialogue inspired and energized to continue our work in advancing sexual and reproductive health and rights. Before we begin, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to address a few housekeeping rules. Since we have a large group, all the attendees will be on mute except for the designated speakers. At that time, to our speakers, please disable your cameras because this will help save bandwidth and ensure a smooth experience. The closed captions have also been enabled for those who would prefer English subtitles for this event as well. We're also providing simultaneous international sign language interpretation. As you can see, go right next to me. We encourage you to also use the chat function for any questions or comments, dear attendees. And that's enough for our housekeeping, and we're about to kick off. Ladies and gentlemen, the Generation Equality Forum is a civil society-centered, multi-stakeholder global gathering for gender equality convened by UN Women and co-hosted by the governments of Mexico and France in partnership with civil society and youth. Through co-creation, diverse and inclusive consultations, the forum brings together feminist advocates from across the globe to foster action and renew movements for gender equality, as well as to launch a set of innovative and multi-stakeholder action coalitions. Now, a little bit of background information. The Generation Equality Forum commenced in Mexico City, Mexico from the 29th to the 31st of March, 2021, and will culminate in Paris, France, later this month. As a global movement for urgent action and accountability for gender equality, the forum promotes systemic and transformative change to accelerate the implementation of the historic Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and leads to gender equality, resilience, and sustainability in a world still affected by COVID-19. Sign language interpretation for today's session is provided by the Malaysia Federation of the Deaf, NFD, and we're joined by interpreter Sulengo. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to call upon His Excellency, Mr. Roland Galharagu, French Ambassador to Malaysia, to deliver his opening remarks. Your Excellency, good afternoon. The virtual floor is now yours.
Thank you, Tamina, and good afternoon to all. I would also want to thank the International Planned Parenthood Federation for convening this discussion, which I am very happy to open. France has made gender equality its national priority for the duration of the term of the current president, starting in 2017 till 2022. We believe that gender equality is key, obviously in terms of justice and fairness, but also in terms of social and economic efficiency. So while we are pushing this agenda at home, we're also trying to push it internationally through what we call a feminist diplomacy. A feminist diplomacy means that we are trying to mainstream gender equality in all international forums and in all international issues. We did this, for instance, when we had the presidency of the G7. So this is to explain why we have decided to co-host and co-chair the Generation Equality Forum together with Mexico, an event which is convened by UN Women. We were very encouraged by the success of the pre-summit in Mexico in March, and we are now looking at the final summit in Paris at the end of this month, from the 30th of June to the 2nd of July. As you know, the goal of the forum is to come up with concrete, ambitious, and inclusive solutions to key challenges to gender equality. To do this, we are trying to build what we've called action coalitions in 6 fields, and let me quote them. First is gender-based violence. Second, economic justice and rights. 3, bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights, our topic for today. 4, feminist action for climate justice. 5, technology and innovation for gender equality. And 6, last but not least, feminist movements and leadership. So when it comes to sexual health and reproductive health and rights, France has identified 3 priorities to be discussed at the Paris Summit. The 3 priorities are: 1, the need for a comprehensive sexuality education that empowers young people. For instance, in France, sexual education is compulsory in French schools, but we are still faced with resistances, cultural resistances from the part of some families. So how do we overcome these resistances? The second priority is to improve the availability, accessibility, acceptability, and quality of contraception and abortion services. For instance, what is the impact of the pandemic on the right to access to abortion? Do we need to perhaps extend the delays, for instance, as we did, for instance, in France, we decided to extend medical access to abortion 9 weeks after the last period instead of 7 weeks. And the third priority is to identify what is needed in terms of political and social measures for girls and women to gain complete control over their bodies. So how do we fight female genital mutilation? How do we fight sexual harassment and make it uncool? How do we deal with period poverty and other similar issues? So we hope that participants in the Paris Summit will help us come up with positive ideas and proposals to advance gender equality, and we are looking forward to your participation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very fruitful discussion. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. A very insightful way to frame the far-reaching impacts of achieving gender equality through women and girls' rights to bodily autonomy and SRHR, particularly as globally we are still impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move towards setting the scene for the dialogue session that is highly anticipated for today. We will now have the privilege of hearing firsthand from each one of our stellar lineup of feminist advocates and experts. Please allow me to introduce them all at this juncture. Joining us today from all corners of the Asia Pacific are our esteemed speakers: Upala Devi, Regional Gender Technical Advisor with UNFPA APRO. Hello, Upala. Tomoko Fukada, Regional Director with IPPF East and Southeast Asia and Oceania region.
Hello, everyone.
Tomoko is also joined by Sivananthi Thanathiran, Executive Director with the Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women, ARROW. Good afternoon, Sivananthi.
Good afternoon.
We're also joined by Suraksha Giri, a youth activist from Nepal. Hi, Suraksha. Good afternoon.
Hi. Good morning from Nepal and good afternoon to everyone.
Lovely to have you with us. And last but not least, Shalai Korobusser, Director for Women, Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation with the Government of the Republic of Fiji, joining us from Fiji. Hello, Shalai. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Bolavinaka, distinguished panelists, Your Excellency. Greetings from Fiji.
Wonderful to have you all with us. So attendees, just to inform you of the flow and the structure moving forward, we will begin with each of our speakers taking the floor for around 5 to 7 minutes to present their essential work in the arena of bodily autonomy and SRHR, all despite the ongoing pandemic. After which, I'll have the privilege of leading a discussion on how best to accelerate their transformative work. A note to all our attendees, once again, we welcome your thoughtful questions and comments directed towards the speakers throughout the session, and we will address as many as possible during the Q&A towards the end. The chat box visually on the right side of your screen is naturally for this purpose. A gentle reminder also now to our speakers to kindly mute yourself when you're not speaking. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to call upon firstly, Upala Devi, Regional Gender Technical Advisor with the United Nations Population Fund, Asia Pacific Regional Office. Now, Upala is based at UNFPA's Asia Pacific Regional Office and is joining us from Bangkok with a vast portfolio of experience in working on development issues over the last 22 years. Upala has spoken at, among various other high-profile engagements, the US Department of State, the US Senate, and Harvard's John F. Kennedy School. Today, Upala is joining us to share an overview of the Action Coalition, the areas of concern that it seeks to address, as well as, of course, the strategies and tactics identified to tackle them. Upala, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Moderator, and Honorable, Your Excellency, Honorable Ronald Galhange, my panel of distinguished fellow panelists, friends, colleagues, and participants. It gives me great honor today to be at this first ever Asia Pacific regional gathering for the Global Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and SRHR under the auspices of the Gender Equality Forum. What I'm going to do is just take around 5 to 6 minutes to run over an overview of what the Gender Equality Forum is all about. What is the Global Action Coalition on this particular issue? And what do we do in terms of making commitments moving forward? I do have a PowerPoint that I want to share, and let's see if I can do it. Okay. So let me go there. So can you see my slides? Yes. Right.
Paula, please make in the presentation mode.
Yes, I'm trying to do that. Sorry. To do that, I should be going towards the. All right, great. So welcome once again. And so what really our Honorable Excellency, the Ambassador has already spoken about the Gender Equality Forum, which is really a civil society centered global gathering for gender equality and women's empowerment and girls' empowerment rights. It's convened by UN Women and co-chaired by France and Mexico with the close partnership with the Global Civil Society Advisory Group as a part of the commemoration of the Beijing Plus 25 anniversary events. So what's the Gender Equality Forum and what are the action coalitions around the forum? Gender Equality Forum really aims to set the foundation for a renewed era of women and girls' rights that accelerates progress towards achieving gender equality and women's empowerment towards a global movement of building collaborative partnerships. And these are the partnerships which are namely in the form of the action coalitions that we are convening here under today. So as our Honorable Excellency, the Ambassador alluded to, there are 6 global action coalitions. The first is the Coalition on Gender-Based Violence. We have one on economic justice and rights. The third is on bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive rights, the one that we're convening here today in the region. We have one on feminist action for climate change, technology and innovation for gender equality, and last is on feminist movements and leadership. We also have a compact on women, peace and security, which is not a coalition per se, but which sort of cross-cuts across the different coalitions because the work on women, peace and security, particularly in a crisis setting, is paramount across the world that the coalitions are set to undertake. So what is the Action Coalition Bodily Autonomy and SRHR? I come from the UN Population Fund, UNFPA, and for UNFPA, who is a co-convener of this Global Action Coalition along with IPPF and ARROW, it's really an opportunity for UNFPA to advocate and reaffirm the importance of the International Conference for Population and Development Program of Action for achieving gender equality within the context of course, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Decade of Action, and at this point, paramount is the work that's in addressing COVID response and recovery. So who are the co-leaders of the Bodily Action, of the Action Coalition, Bodily Autonomy and SRHR? Along with UNFPA, we have France, Argentina, Denmark, Burkina Faso, North Macedonia, and the Global Financial Facility for Women, Girls, and Adolescents as members. We also have from the civil society and ARROW, which is the board today. We have the Alliance des Droits et Santé. We have the IPPF, the International Plan Parenthood Federation, the Foundation para Estudio Investigador, Commission for Indigenous Children, and Children's Investment Foundation. The Global Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and SRHR is founded on 4 pillars, and our Excellency, the Ambassador, did allude to the 4 pillars. They are really looking at how women and girls, the first pillar really looks at how women and girls in all the diversity are empowered to exercise their sexual and reproductive health and rights and make autonomous decisions about their bodies, free from coercion, violence, and discrimination. The second looks at how comprehensive sexuality education, including SRHR education and information and services, are freely available, accessible, acceptable, and of high quality, and that women, girls, and feminist organization networks and the allies are strengthened to advance SRHR, and that more governments globally promote, protect, and invest in SRHR, including as part of their overall national universal health coverage schemes. Working across multiple stakeholders and action coalitions and at different levels, we try and transform gender and social norms, promote gender equality, applying an intersectional, intercultural, human rights-based approach to improve SRHR outcomes under the leaving no one behind paradigm. And finally, the 4th pillar is really on supporting the participation of autonomous feminist organizations, including girl-led and indigenous organizations, women's human rights defenders, and peace builders, networks, and movements working to promote and protect bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive rights in health. So what really needs to change globally? As all of us who are a part of this discussion and have convened here today know, worldwide, it's 45% of women and girls aged between 15 and 49 who are married or are in unions that cannot access and make their own decisions about sexual and reproductive health and rights. They cannot decide about healthcare, contraception, family planning, and their own sexual practices, including saying no to sex. And this scenario assumes a lot of importance, and really in this situation right now where we are in a COVID scenario, where the rates of maternal mortality rates are high, as well as adolescent pregnancies, because as we all know, in crisis settings, in humanitarian settings, pregnancy rates do spike. So through the 4 different pillars of this Global Action Coalition on SRHR and bodily autonomy, what are we trying to do? We are trying to increase SRHR decision-making bodily autonomy, and some of the tactics that we are going to look at is to look at how laws, policies, and practices on the ground can actually enable such access to SRHR decision-making and bodily autonomy, including looking at how we can address and change patriarchal and harmful social norms. In terms of expanding the bandwidth, if you will, of comprehensive sexuality education, how can we look at increasing delivery of comprehensive sexuality education in and out of school, reaching more than 50 million children, adolescents, and youth by the year 2026? And some of the tactics that we can employ or deploy in this regard would look at service delivery, again, addressing harmful social norms, looking at enabling laws and policies, and of course, looking at comprehensive quality, accessible education and capacity development for all stakeholders. Increasing the availability, accessibility, acceptability, and quality of comprehensive abortion and contraceptive services forms the third pillar of the coalition. And some of the tactics to achieve this availability, accessibility, quality, comprehensive framework would be again through quality service delivery, looking at enabling laws and policies, looking at addressing harmful social norms, looking at financing, really looking at standalone financing for accessing the services and enabling the services, and finally looking at data and accountability. You will see that some of the tactics that we want to employ to reach some of the goals under this coalition are pretty much the same. And finally, when you're looking at strengthening women's and girls' feminist organizations and networks, financing and accountability and participation and enabling participation of such networks and organizations would be key. So today in the morning, we just received news that right now, letters of intent to become commitment makers and leaders for this particular action coalition is open and will be open till the 18th of June. And they're really looking at two different ways by which you can be a commitment maker or a leader. Leaders are those who are primarily member states and are limited in numbers and have to make 5-year commitments. And the selection process is through a formal letter of intent submission, and the selection will be determined by Generation Equality Core Group. Commitment makers could be anybody. Anybody could be a commitment makers. It could be you, me, civil society organizations, autonomous organizations, community leaders, networks, everybody. And so there is no limit in terms of numbers when you can become a commitment maker. If you want to become a commitment maker, there is, however, a 1-year minimum commitment in terms of how you want to make your commitments towards this forum. And again, there will be an online submission, which is available on the UN Women website. There will be an application validation process that's going to be managed by UN Women, and the selection will be validated by the Action Coalition's leadership structures. And what will be a commitment maker? What will be becoming a commitment maker mean? It means that commitment makers will be making bold and transformative commitments to one or several of the 5 other action coalitions. You will play a catalytic role in supporting the implementation monitoring of actions of the different coalitions, and you will be mobilizing your other networks and stakeholders around the action coalition team and blueprint. As I mentioned, anyone can become a commitment maker, and when you become a commitment maker, what does it entail? You look at partnerships, enabling partnerships. You're looking at making some policy commitments. Some financial commitments will be, of course, welcome. Advocacy commitments, looking at how you can enable media advocacy, for example, using your social media networks to make commitments around this action group. And looking at some programmatic commitments, which is more in terms of what, for example, international civil society organizations, networks, the UN would be undertaking. And the commitments should be path-breaking, should be game-changing, should of course be measurable both qualitatively and quantitatively between a 1 and the 5-year framework that we are looking towards, and looking at ideally designed with other stakeholders and partnerships so that we have a huge global bandwidth of commitment makers working towards a particular cause. So in terms of UNFPA's action plan around this coalition, UNFPA has today at the global level reiterated its commitment to be a commitment maker and co-lead this action coalition. And our action plan is to use this forum and the action coalition as an opportunity to raise visibility for the International Conference of Population Development's Program of Action, to ensure political and financial support for SRHR issues, to link the Nairobi commitments to the Generation Equality Forum and Action Coalitions, galvanize greater support for comprehensive sexuality education, advocate for young women's leadership in efforts to end harmful practices, including child marriage, female genital mutilation, gender-biased sex selection, and son preference. We have decided to be very bold and innovative in our approach towards addressing and reaching the goals of this coalition. And to that extent, we have internally as an organization put in place different milestones and forums around which we are going to coalesce around and under. We are trying to ensure linkages to our work on GBV, including to link up with the GBV Action Coalition that's co-led by UN Women, WH, and other stakeholders. We are trying to ensure coherent communication across UNFPA to speak with one voice, to be informed and to be strategic in approach. Effective organization and UNFPA engagement is key and has been during the Mexico event that happened in March and is key to the upcoming Paris event that's happening in June and other relevant forums throughout 2021 and beyond. Will demonstrate the interdependence and reinforcing relationships between gender equality and empowerment and SRHR and between the ICPD Pro of Action and the Beijing Platform of Action. We will position women and girls decision-making and body autonomy under the SRHR SDG target 5.6, which is crucial in reaching UNFPA's 3 transformative results under a strategic plan moving forward. And of course, all of the work under this action coalition will be grounded and centered around UNFPA's programs, mechanisms, primarily UNFPA supplies, our thematic fronts, our joint programs on child marriage, FGM, and the Mosako initiative to accelerate maternal health and adolescent rights. I'm not going to go into this slide, but just in terms of the Paris Gender Equality Forum that's coming up at the end of this month, the forum looks like this in terms of the sessions. There'll be VIPs, it's of course virtual, and there'll be VIPs that are going to do opening sessions, 20 persons face-to-face on SRHR education, movement right defenders. There'll be 2-hour sessions for each of the 6 action coalitions. There'll be thematic sessions, actually 18 as when we last counted, and the call for proposals are currently out. There'll be some events centering around cultural and cultural issues, sports issues, team building, coalition building, and so on and so forth. And finally, there'll be large meetings to discuss topics moving forward in terms of follow-up actions. So what can commitment makers hope to achieve an impact? You would be looking at advancing gender transformative interventions to achieve bodily autonomy and SRHR. That's of course our primary objective under this coalition. We will try to leverage opportunities to overcome barriers to expanding comprehensive sexuality education, increasing the availability, acceptability, accessibility, and quality of comprehensive abortion care and services and voluntary contraception would be key. Increasing SRHR decision-making and bodily autonomy, especially through targeting and addressing harmful social and gender norms, looking at enabling policy and legal and legislative change, including to prevent practices like early child and forced marriages and unions and female genital mutilation, other harmful practices like son preference and gender-biased sex selection. And finally, looking at strengthening accountability to and participation, enabling and support for autonomous girls, women, and feminist organizations, networks, and movements working to promote and protect bodily autonomy in SRHR, not just under this coalition, not just under the Gender Equality Forum, but moving forward over and above the SDGs and beyond. And with that, I end my presentation and over to you, Madam Navarro. Thank you so much all for participating and listening.
Thank you so much, Upala. Thank you especially for sharing the exciting news that applications for commitment makers are now open all the way till the 17th of June. Also your key insights there, especially regarding what needs to change. 45% of women and girls globally being unable to access bodily autonomy and SRHR during the pandemic is certainly a rallying call for our collective action. Next, ladies and gentlemen, our upcoming speakers will each highlight and help unpack these focused action areas so excellently framed by Upala. I would thus like to invite firstly Tomoko Fukuda, Regional Director with the International Planned Parenthood Federation, East and Southeast Asia and Oceania region, IPPF ACR. Tomoko is responsible for leadership and management for the work of IPPF in the region, supporting 23 member associations and 3 collaborating partners in a total of 25 countries, all working towards advancing sexual and reproductive health and rights, SRHR. IPPF is also the co-lead of Generation Equality Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and SRHR. Tomoko, I would love for you to tell us a little more about the need to focus on contraception and SRHR as part of the commitments to SRHR and bodily autonomy, including contraception, safe abortion, laws, and policies. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Tamina, and warm welcome to all of you who has joined us today. It's so encouraging to see almost 200 people who have joined us, and I think it shows how deeply we are all committed to advancing the cause. And this Generation Equality Forum is giving us an opportunity to really push this agenda forward globally and especially in our region. So warm welcome to everyone, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak on especially around contraception and the need for safe abortion. So what I would like to say today would probably be reiterating many of the things that have already been said and many of the things that you have already been thinking about. But the power to make choices on one's fertility is so important because it underpins many of the other rights, and the benefits run in so many different directions. The right for a woman to girl to make autonomous decisions about her own body and reproductive functions is a very core fundamental right to equality and privacy. If a woman can make her own decisions about sex, for example, who and when to have sex with, contraception, when and how many children to have, she's likely to enjoy better health overall. It would also increase opportunities for education. She may own her own property, be fully employed, have more time for leisure, and avoid gender-based violence as well. And if we know also that if she is able to make choices about having children, they are more likely to be healthy. So the power to make choices over their own body links directly to poverty, education, hunger, decent work and economic growth, reducing inequalities, which is a good big chunk of all the SDGs goals. That's why contraception is so central to ensuring the well-being of a woman. And I think we've all also faced now with the COVID pandemic, the worsening inequalities around the world, how we have heard about how it has increased sexual violence. There are new barriers to accessing healthcare. There is job and education losses. We have seen how it has really changed and impacted women and girls' lives all around. And this has just added to the challenges that we are facing today in terms of ensuring access to contraception. So what are the challenges that we face? Definitely, and first and foremost, information is not equally available to everyone. And although we live in a very digitized world now and information seems to be more than abundant, still about half of the world's population is offline and they do not have access to digital information. Even for those who are online, this can be empowering, but then the volume and content of information can be overwhelming, it can be incorrect, it can be misleading. So how can we ensure access to credible and accurate information? And this leads to the conversation later a little bit today around comprehensive sexuality education for young people. How do we ensure that young people are able to get the correct and accurate information early on in their lives so that they can make informed choices about their sexuality, sex, and reproductive health? Also the challenges that we face are around accessibility is becoming extremely diverse. I think it is not simply said to say in one way or another, but women and girls come in all diversities, their ethnicity, their economic status, the places they live, the situations they're in are extremely diverse, and ensuring access to these services without discrimination is extremely a big challenge that sometimes can go very much unnoticed. People think that it is quite simple, but it is not simple. And I think what we need to do is to unpack the diverse challenges that women and girls face. I think this is a part where civil society comes in, because we are the ones who are working with the women and girls at the community levels. We know what is the challenges that they face. We know what needs to happen so that they can access these services. That is why it is important for those who are working directly with the women and girls be able to voice and raise these concerns to governments, raise them higher so that the systems can be changed and such contraceptive services can be available and affordable to everyone. And we easily get caught up in the politicization of safe abortion, but I think we must come back to the basics. I think we don't want any woman to have to go through an abortion. That's why we are pushing for accessible and affordable contraceptives so that we can prevent unintended pregnancies. But I think what we are saying is that if a woman, because of her diverse situation, opts to terminate a pregnancy, she should not be told what to do by a government. She should definitely not be jailed because of it. She should be given the care and help she needs so that she can prevent unintended pregnancies in the future and gain control over her life. We know that countries where women have the right to terminate pregnancy and are provided with access to information to all methods of contraception have the lowest rates of termination of pregnancy. And it was really encouraging to hear his Honorable Ambassador inform us about the decision that the French government made in making medical abortion accessible to 9 weeks instead of 7 weeks, and increasing possibilities of access to services during this COVID pandemic. So these are the things I think that we need to see and see implemented, see actions around, in hopes that women and girls are able to access information and supplies contraceptive services in a timely manner. And we need governments to step up and make financial commitments, make sure that sexual and reproductive health services are a part of their universal health core packages that are delivered to the communities. And of course, we need to see that laws and policies ensure that this is able to happen. There are laws that disproportionately impact women, such as laws that criminalize abortion, adultery, or sex work. There are also discriminatory laws and policies based on sexual orientation or gender identity, migration status, for example. And so we need to make sure that we work and advocate with governments to change these laws and policies to enable an environment where women and girls can be supported to access the services. So I think we need to continue to call on decision makers to urgently correct inequitable access to sexual and reproductive health care and education. We need to strike down discriminatory laws that are barriers to the full attainment of SRHR. And we need to bring about real change. And we need a well-informed future generation that would help us to do so. And we need this action now. As IPPF, we are committed to working with all partners in the Action Coalition. And thank you for giving us the opportunity today to speak, and let's work together to make this a reality. Thank you, and back to you, Tamina.
Thank you so much, Tomoko. What really struck me about your action area is the fact that you said about information inequality. Half the world's population being unable to access correct and accurate information, and the consequent ramifications of that on CSE for women and girls. Also the emphasis on decriminalizing abortion and destigmatizing and accessing of SRHR overall. We now move swiftly, ladies and gentlemen, to our next speaker, Sivananthi Sanathiran, who is Executive Director with the Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women, or ARROW. Now, ARROW is a feminist organization based in Malaysia and is one of the Generation Equality Forum Action Coalition co-leads on bodily autonomy and SRHR. Siva is a member of the Civil Society Advisory Group to the core group of the Generation Equality Forum. She has also co-authored ARROW's ICPD Plus 15 and ICPD Plus 20 Asia Pacific Monitoring Reports, written numerous articles, and presented papers on women's sexual and reproductive health and rights. Sivananthi, such a pleasure to have you join us. We would love to hear from you about creating and maintaining feminist as well as civil society spaces, strengthening feminist organizing and participation, plus also the role which feminist and women's organizations can play in accelerating progress, improving accountability and transparency, as well for bodily autonomy and SRHR. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Tamina. Thank you, Ambassador Roland, as well as Upala from UNFPA. I hope that Bjarne is also with us. And of course, Tomoko and her team for organizing this with UNFPA. ARROW is really happy to be part of this wonderful panel. Of course, I mean, it's a reminder to all of us that the feminist movement has been strongly involved in Beijing, as well as the subsequent reviews of Beijing. But not only Beijing, but we also have the shared common agenda with ICPD or the Cairo agenda as well. So the feminist movement has been intervening in this international document making processes for almost more than 25, 30 years. So 25 years ago, or 26 years ago, the Beijing Platform for Action, when it was launched, it grabbed the imagination of the world, and it was, grabbed headlines all across the world. And we also hope that that similar momentum is going to be accomplished during this Generation Equality Forum. The Beijing Platform for Action actually kind of focused on 12 chapters, where there was poverty, economy, education, health, politics, environment, and so on and so forth. It was then considered the most comprehensive and resulted in many of the changes and decisions and policies that we now kind of inherit or see taking place at national level. Whether it is about political participation of women, women's right to inheritance, women's labor force participation. These are all economic decisions that have been influenced by the action items set out in the Beijing Platform for Action. Right. However, still, as much as we as the feminist movement really value the Platform for Action, which was created 25 years ago, we are also very mindful that the world has really changed drastically. And there is a need to actually make the feminist agenda, as well as the women's rights agenda, very rooted in a current reality. And that current reality, which has been reiterated by many of the speakers before me, is one that is, it's is a world in crisis, so to speak, and we can see that, some of those gaps in Beijing were the fact that, sexuality was considered binary, right? And when youth sexuality was mentioned, it was almost always paired with youth responsibility. There was no mention of non-binary bodies or non-binary sexualities. And 25 years later, we can see that the world has grown, changed completely, its understanding and its acceptance around these issues. There were also very few mentions of class in the Beijing Platform for Action, but this is something that has been so deeply rooted even within the SDGs, right? The inequality, the differences between the top 1% and the rest of the bottom 99%. That is, of course, something that calls us to actually put again that inequality analysis and again bifurcate that inequality analysis with a class analysis. There was very little, of course, for those who come from the South Asian context. There was very little mention of caste, as an organizing force in society, or race, beyond just an axis of discrimination, that race is an organizing axis within society. But all of this have, exploded into the public discourse and public debate in the last 2-3 years. So we're very mindful that all of the actions and the commitments that we are making need to be rooted in this type of current context that we have. And, and at the root of it, or the heart of this action coalition and the actions that the feminist movement hope to see, is the fact that, the emphasis on autonomy, the emphasis on choices, the emphasis on decision making, which are really critical in order to empower women and girls and those who take the identity of women and girls in order to make those decisions about their lives. Because only when we make decisions about our lives can we actually have control over our lives. Because of this feminist organizing, and Tamina, you've already mentioned that the feminist movement had looked at the Generation Equality Forum as the way to actually push forward what we term as the unfinished agenda of Beijing, right? So across all of the different action coalitions that have been proposed, we can see that, climate justice is a deeply rooted theme that definitely in the global South, that the global South is, suffering from the effects of the overdevelopment of the global North, and we are actually bearing the undue burden. And I'm quite sure that our ambassador from Fiji will actually talk to that, because and not only that even in the global South, it is the bodies of women and girls and those who take the identity of women and girls who actually suffer from the disproportionate effects of that, right? So we have those themes. We have the themes of economic justice, or rather economic injustice wrought by the neoliberal economic framework, which has been absorbed by the policies, by almost all of our governments in the region. So in SRHR and bodily autonomy, it's really important for us to really look at this issue and that is why those 3 action areas were very critical to us. We know that after 25, 26 years, every year when we go into the Commission on the Status of Women or the Commission on Population and Development, member states and governments are stalled, and where do they stall? They stall around access to contraceptives for all those who need them, not just those who are married, but actually young people who are vulnerable and marginalized from those services due to either their marital status or the other socioeconomic factors, right? You talked about rural, because they live in rural areas or they belong to a lower socioeconomic status. And then we also see that debates are always stalled at the access to safe abortion, right? And the commitment that actually governments made in Beijing was to go one step beyond Cairo and review unjust laws which penalized women. And this is something that has taken, a number of countries in our region have done it post Beijing, and this would include countries like Nepal. It would include countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, which have changed their laws to be more progressive, but still these are too few to mention. And then the other one is, of course, comprehensive sexuality education, which time and again, governments in our region like to term it as a Western agenda, which has been imposed upon us. But we do know that Asia Pacific region has the largest youth demographic. It is absolutely critical for us to be able to empower the young people in our region with the information that is so needed, whether through technology means or through traditional means, both within school and out of school, so that they can make the right decisions and choose for themselves, and they have those options to do so in order to get along with their lives and make the right. And so these are some of those unfinished agenda that we were talking about. The third area, of course, was to change gender norms that exist in society. And I think COVID-19 has really kind of put the spotlight on that issue again, because we saw a resurgence of gender-based violence, which again is about gender norms. We saw a resurgence of, or not really a resurgence, I think it was always there, but the work from home situation probably shed light on the fact that many women continue to shoulder, the care work in the home scenario. And we are actually one of the regions which have, where women do, I think, 4 to 5 times more care work than any other women in the region. So I think that some of those changing of gender norms is absolutely essential. So these are the 3 things, the key areas that we had chosen for as action or priority theme areas to go one step further, right? But of course, as the feminist movement, we're always looking at interlinkages with other intergovernmental documents. And we can also see that how perhaps some of these actions in the Generation Equality Forum, things that we are able to actually look at setting the standard or helping advance, the Asia Pacific Population Conference, which was held in the region. A midterm review was held, and as an indicator framework for actually all of the countries in the region to kind of adhere to and to look at how we can make movement in the region. There's, of course, the high-level political forum, which takes place in New York around the Sustainable Development Goals. But we also have our Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, which kind of looks at how progress between SDG 3 and SDG 5 also can be made. So we actually see the Generation Equality Forum kind of helping push the boundaries so that the achievements which are more related to health and rights can also be fulfilled within the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the ICPD agenda, which is with both the Nairobi commitments and in the region have to do with the Asia Pacific Population Conference. So these are the ways in which we are hoping that the world can be slowly pushed towards making this necessary changes.
Thank you so much, Sivananthi, for correlating the interlinkages of discrimination, all absolutely spot on. It's so true. We've grown and changed incredibly as a global community from ICP Beijing more than 25 years ago to today, actually conscious of intersectional discriminations and working towards addressing each one of these unfinished agendas. COVID may not seem like a silver lining of any sort, but at the same time, it has definitely highlighted all of these discriminations, making it much more likely that this may actually be resolved during our lifetimes. From there, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to our youth advocate, Suraksha Giri, a youth activist from Nepal. Now, Suraksha is an active youth volunteer and youth champion with the Family Planning Association of Nepal, FPAN, the Palpa branch, since 2014. She is currently a member of the PPF Board of Trustees and an executive board youth member with FPAN Province 5. Her work focuses on reducing abortion stigma, providing easy access to safe sexual and reproductive health services. She has taught comprehensive sexuality education, CSE, in several schools, youth clubs, and participated in numerous awareness programs aimed at teenagers and women from underserved communities. Suraksha, given your hands-on experience and as a young person, why do you feel the action on CSE is such an important part of this specific action coalition? The floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator Tamina, and namaste everyone from Nepal, His Excellency panelists and everyone attending from around the world. And first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank UNFPA, IPPF, and Generation Equality Forum for having me as a panelist in today's program with such an honorable personalities. And yeah, to answer this question, let me take you together to the journey of my teenage when I was a young girl studying in class 8. And back then I got an opportunity to be part of a comprehensive sexuality education program, which was given by Family Planning Association of Nepal. So it works under the umbrella of IPPF, International Planned Parenthood Federation, and as one of the member association, and they have been providing this education to schools, out of schools, youth clubs, and many more. So since a very long time, in collaboration with health and population teachers, and in support with FPAN field workers, followed with the cascading model. So by the year, it has also been subsequently added to the course as well. And since then, I started my journey as a peer educator to FPA Nepal, working with the most vulnerable group with limited access to comprehensive sexuality education, as by setting the goal, reaching 50 million more adolescents and youth by 2026, and making access in schools and out of schools. Later in 2018 and 19, I also got an opportunity to work and closely observe myself as a youth champion in the district, where I got an opportunity to work mostly in the grassroots, local, provincial and national level, and with culturally diverse group of communities, adolescents, women, and people living with disability, PLHIVs, and marginalized and vulnerable communities, and advocate for their reproductive and health rights. So I realized that youth had to face so much of challenges, and were stigmatized for seeking health services back then, and still it's now. And yeah, moreover, their views were not addressed and they were excluded from decision-making part. And I found out that LGBTIQ plus communities had to face a lot of discriminations and negligence in every sectors, that may be health, education, getting citizenship, or love, relationships, and many more. So I want to share you a small case which I remember. There was a girl from marginalized community who was just 14 years of age and was unknown where to seek help for abortion services. And one of her friend, who was our peer educator, brought her to FPA, where the doctor found out that it was already 13 weeks of pregnancy. And she was scared, and she explained how she was like unknown of all of these and had no idea of comprehensive sexuality education. And luckily, from the Zonal Hospital with her parents, she got the second trimester service from the help of FPN. So later she continued with her studies as well. She also joined as a peer educator in our organization. So other case was also a case of a student in a rural area who were like unknown about even a minor health and reproductive information, despite being a student of secondary level class, and because the teacher had skipped these topics. So this kind of real story touched me and tells that there are so many gaps in the countries, not just in Nepal, but now as working as a board of trustee in IPPF, working globally, I now know that there has been a gap in many developed and developing countries as well around the world. So children are still unaware of good touch and bad touch, and should know that it comes under the CSA education and how important it is. And obviously we should overcome all of these challenges, and I believe together as a youth we can. So to support us, I would like to humbly request to the planners, activists, investors, global parental organizations like UNFPA, global health organizations such as UN, WHO, government and health assistants, and different type of coalition partners, CSO, and stakeholders in sensitizing and to addressing the gaps to make access of CSE in the poor, marginalized, socially exclusive, and underserved communities. And for this, obviously, we need some strategies, and me as a youth just can recommend some tricky ways for this, such as to make access of comprehensive sexuality education by conducting more and more trainings to the youth groups and advocating to integrate CSE in the formal education curriculum as well. Secondly, making the youth-friendly services, health delivery centers, make available services in the morning and in the evening time, as well as in the holiday time as well, because they're the school-going youths and adolescents, and they don't get time maybe during the daytime, and they have been highly stigmatized. So they might be searching for such kind of service. And third, as a production of audio and visual learning materials, as and also in the braille lipis to differently abled people. And fourth would be collecting different ideas and perceptions of culturally diverse communities would be very effective for CSE to realize as an important part of life. And fifth would be globally advocating CSE in the music and sports, as youth loves it. And in today's generation, they are more into it. And in the spatial tournaments by applying different methods. And final, last but not the least, disseminating CSE by advertising in most popular social medias that youngsters follows these days, such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. So here now, I call on young people to play an active role in advancing the gender equality and reproductive right as a torch barrier of ICPD and global goals. And having said this, to summarize in one sentence as my quote, I would like to say that if we stand in solidarity and be one voice, we can achieve our goal by 2026. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Suraksha. CSE is definitely such an essential element in ensuring girls' bodily autonomy and SRHR. Your rationalizations and evidence-based observations are priceless. We also really appreciate your heartfelt sharing of use cases, the critical gaps and life-changing impacts of having timely access to SRHR. From there, ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to our final speaker before beginning the panel discussion with all of the speakers before. I have the pleasure now of introducing Salai Korobusir, Director for Women, Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation with the Government of the Republic of Fiji. Salai, ladies and gentlemen, has served in a number of agencies within the Fijian government. Her areas of expertise are in research and policy, planning, human resource training and development, productivity and excellence. She has worked extensively with programs that promote disaster risk management, women's development, and gender equality. Salai, we would be so fortunate to glean your insights on making and keeping commitments to gender equality, particularly the role played by your government in making commitments to the cause of SRHR and gender equality, as well as to strengthen gender responsiveness of the COVID-19 response and recovery process. The floor is yours, Salai.
Thank you, Madam Moderator Bulavinaka, and greetings from Fiji. Allow me first to start by wishing you and your loved ones good health this evening. So, Excellencies and distinguished fellow panelists and guests, I'm honored to be part of this important panel of the Asia Pacific Multi-Stakeholder Dialogue on Bodily Autonomy and SRHR, and of course, its response and recovery. So on behalf of the Fiji government, I would like to extend our appreciation to IPPF and UNFPA through our Reproductive and Family Health Association here in Fiji for their continued partnership and support and helping us move forward towards the goal of gender equality and of course the empowerment of all women and girls, not only in Fiji, but in the Pacific. I guess by now most of us would have experienced firsthand how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted our lives, our ability to leave home, our work, and to go to school or to access public and health and social services. For me, I had to make special arrangements to be part of this program as working from home would not allow me to participate in such virtual discussions. But I'm really fortunate and I'm honored to be part of this program. And of course, we know these impacts are not the same for everyone. For Fijian women here are making significant and critical contributions to address this COVID-19 pandemic in Fiji as key frontline responders. And this is counting doctors, the nurses, the lab workers, the midwives, social workers, even the hospital cleaners, the market vendors, our supermarket clerks, the quarantine workers, and primary caregivers at home. 63% of our health workers and 85% of our market vendors in Fiji are women, placing them at increased risk and exposure to infection. For us, women in Fiji are also overrepresented in the sectors and jobs which are hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic: the tourism and hospitality industry, retail, handicraft, manufacturing, and the most vulnerable types of employment with the least protection, such as workers in the informal employment, including the self-employed, our domestic workers, daily wage workers, and contributing family workers. You will know that global data confirms that since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, reports on violence against women and girls, particularly domestic violence, has increased across the world. In Fiji, there has been a significant and alarming increase in calls to our domestic violence national helplines. Fijian women and girls, like other parts of the world, have unique health needs over their life cycle, but they also have limited access to quality health care, counting sexual and reproductive health and rights, the services and information, access to the information, reproductive cancers are diagnosed and treatments and others. The restrictive social norms that we have and gender stereotypes also limit our Fijian women and girls their ability to access these health services. These pre-existing limitations at the time of COVID-19 pandemic has, without a doubt, affected quality and the availability of sexual and reproductive health rights services, placing women, adolescent girls, and the most vulnerable and at risk. I would like to highlight that the Fijian government recognizes that the gendered impact of COVID-19 is prioritizing the importance of gender-responsive national response and recovery plans in fighting effects. The Department for Women, under our Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, has been working closely with stakeholders, and I would like to acknowledge what the distinguished panelist Tomoko had mentioned in her discussion, recognizing the critical contributions of civil societies and NGOs who have worked with and are working with other grassroots women and girls. And it's critical also for government to hear and listen to civil society organizations. So for us here, for the Ministry of the National Women's Machinery, working closely with the relevant stakeholders in advocating and coordinating responses that meet immediate needs of all women and girls, including SRHR issues, and our work to ensure that we reach those left furthest behind, also while safeguarding and leveraging gains made on gender equality and women and girls' rights. So for us at the National Women's Machinery, working with them, coordinating with them, listening to them is critical. As I said, in Fiji, the National Women's Machinery is quite small. So it's critical that we reach out and listen to our partners that work with the grassroots women and girls. So our efforts are really aimed to place all women and girls at the center of policy and national response, to be able to build capacity of key service providers, to improve the quality of services and response, strengthen the services for women who experience violence during COVID-19, and build strong advocacy and awareness about increased violence against women, as well as sexual and reproductive health rights risks, while also support the distribution of dignity kits and SRHR information, which I know, as our youth advocate had mentioned, and also making use of all the platforms available to get all this information out. So some of the key actions that Fiji has undertaken has included the formation of a gender and COVID-19 working group, and the development of a gender and COVID-19 guidance note, which has been noted by our Fijian cabinet and highlights the gendered impacts of COVID-19 in Fiji on selected sectors and the important issues such as SRHR and violence against women and girls, with brief analysis. We also saw the formulation of a gender-based violence working group under our safety and protection cluster system here in Fiji. And this is, of course, to rapidly advance prevention and response against violence, on violence against women and girls. So the GBV working group rapidly has developed information, education, and communication materials such as resource kits and virtual trainings for our frontline healthcare workers, community workers and helpline, social welfare and other frontline GBV responders. So this is some of the works that we felt was critical, especially when people were working from home or under lockdown and they couldn't move. So accessing this information was also critical, even giving them awareness on how they can access services through just a phone call or messages. So during this process, we were reminded, one, that no single act or intervention can address the entire range of issues that contribute around women and girls' health and safety, and SRHR in particular, in the context of COVID-19. Two was that there are data gaps that accurately reflect the realities and complexities of women and girls' lives. And this is, of course, what we see is a hindering challenge. On that note, and in conclusion, I would like to underline that data and evidence for us here in Fiji remains one of the most critical gaps for planning and implementing and reporting on women and girls' sexual and reproductive health and rights issue, not only in Fiji again, but also in the Pacific. We need to be able to collect and use data to change attitudes, to inform policies, while moving towards achieving the goal of gender equality and, of course, the empowerment of all women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salai. We truly appreciate your presence and also highlighting the multifarious gendered impacts of COVID-19 on Fijian women, not only with regards to bodily autonomy and SRHR. As you mentioned, 63% of health workers, 85% of market vendors are women in Fiji. Women also form the core of sectors hardest hit by the pandemic: retail, tourism, and related industries, the informally employed. Regionally and globally, this also does resonate. Such statistics will show up similarly and repeatedly. Some real food for thought there. And we also at this juncture hope that our attendees are keying in with their thoughts and questions for our speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now welcome back all our speakers joining us for the panel discussion on the main screen. Welcome back, everyone. Upala, Tomoko, Sivananti, Suraksha, as well as, of course, Salai. All right, everyone. Wonderful to have you with us here again. Let's begin by addressing a couple of the audience questions from the attendees which have been coming in. I have one here firstly for Upala. Upala, for those organizations that have been approved to be commitment makers, what is the best way to connect with the AC's leads and members of this action coalition to form joined up commitments? Is there a way to collaborate on the creation of specific commitments between now and mid-June, the submission deadline?
I think this is a very, very important question. And what we can do at the end of this session is to share our coordinates through the chat box with all who are a part of this event today, so that they can directly get in touch with us. And we can look at exploring coalescing around partnerships, looking at whether, for example, anybody would like to partner with UNFPA and UN Women, WHO, and so on and so forth. And we could also ensure to make the linkages from the UN. And I guess the same would then go for those who would like to be a part of civil society networks, speaking with one voice. So for example, coordinating with IPPF colleagues, with AERO colleagues. So one of the ways to do that would be that we share our contacts and coordinates at the end of the event with all those who are present, so that they can, explore channels of communication with all of us who are a part of this event today, who are the co-leads of this Action Coalition.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Upala. I think it's very important to stay cognizant of the fact that channels of communication are not just open, but encouraged. From there, this question could be directed towards either Tomoko or Siva, and it asks, how do we connect the talk on making laws and international standards more with the need to focus on effective implementation and inclusion, including alliance building, and in particular usage of community legal empowerment initiatives and strengthening of effective alliances between legal rights or health rights, as well as organizations working on women and trans rights.
Tomoko, do you want to go first, or should I go first?
Either or is fine, ladies.
Yeah. So definitely this is something that is really critical because as NGOs, we all work with utilizing international standards as well as legal frameworks in order to hold governments accountable, right, to the rights of citizens. And I think that there have actually been a lot of work being done around community empowerment initiatives. I do remember that there are a few organizations who work very, very diligently on making sure the recommendations made to governments either through the CEDAW framework or the UPR framework is then translated at community level, what it means for the community, and how do I say, disseminated to the community so that the community knows what their rights are, and as well as holding the government to actually reporting on the progress towards that, you know. So I think that that's where some of the dots can be connected between all three. I feel like definitely, you know, we have not, I mean, all movements, all organizations may not have been inclusive as we would have hoped that we could be, right? So definitely in the global north, we can definitely see cleavage between perhaps the feminist organizations or the women's rights organizations with trans-led organizations, right? And even within the SRHR movement, there's always been like more conservative elements who have not always been on access to safe abortion based on women's right to choose, you know. So I think that almost always that alliance building needs to be geared towards holding up the highest standards and the highest values and the highest principles around sexual and reproductive rights. And for that, a lot of conversation, internal conversation also, you know, may need to take place in order for that to happen. So yeah, that's all mine.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Siva. Absolutely. Please go ahead, Tomoko.
Okay. To build on what Siva has just mentioned, and I feel like in the SRHR community, we get together when we have big events like this. So we're now here together towards the Generation Equality Forum, but we lack the platform and to come together at national levels and regional levels on a regular basis. And so linking to this question around alliance building, I think this is extremely key, as also Siva mentioned, for us to be able to be a one voice at the national level. If we work in our own space, and we do work with communities, but if we don't have that access and channel to governments, how can our voices then be translated into policies and systems and strategies? So that alliance building, I think, is lacking. And I think we also need to collectively work with potential donors globally or in the region to really fund and provide financial support to women's groups, feminist groups, organizations who are working in this space of SRHR to build platforms and alliances for SRHR. So when I look at myself and the work we do in IPPF, we are a federation of member associations across 25 countries in East and Southeast Asia. And then with my colleagues in South Asia, we're more than 30 countries in this region. But why just link together member associations? Why not IPPF be the platform to bring together everybody working in this SRHR space? And because the issues are so diverse, we have many different organizations working in SRHR, which are small voices alone. But as SRHR mentioned, when we come together as one voice, we are an extremely strong voice towards governments. So I think this is extremely key and something that we could all work together and actually materialize in the coming year.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Tomoko. The diversity of experiences and organizations now really is the time to bring that all together as literally a behemoth towards actionable change. From there, I have a question for SRHR. SRHR, delivery of CSE continues to be a challenge, and more so during the COVID-19 pandemic-related restrictions. How has this affected you, and what support do you as a young person need in this time?
Yes, thank you so much, Tamina, for this question. Yes, of course, like you said, youth has been very much affected due to this COVID and SRHR. They have been affected in getting access to health services and getting, safe abortion sites or getting contraceptions and many more. And yeah, so this has been a challenge for sure. And for people like people living with HIVs and disability and LGBTI communities, they have been affected mostly because of this COVID. What I found and what I researched, and when I went through medias and all. So yeah, so we as an IPPF member, we as a Family Planning Association and other civil society organization, we have been addressing such problems, and we have been, I know that it's very hard for us to just go and work now. And me as a youth advocate, it is very hard for me to as well just go and work outside. But then still the frontline workers who are really working hard for this to provide them with safe access to everything, whatever they're in need of, and just respecting their rights and decision-making things and everything. So they have been working so hard to get on this and protecting their rights, and huge round of applause to such kind of frontline workers. They have been working so hard, and other civil society organizations and many of the advocates right now, they have been for sure, such as like Sangitai, he's here, who is in UNFPA, and many other YPR and UVA and Visible Impact and many more organizations. They have been working so hard in this situation to do the online educations for CSE and provide the education for disability people with, sign languages and many more. Even in this situation, they have been working so hard, and I've been part of that, and representing and talking about my country and representing globally. So we have been doing such kind of programs, and we have been addressing the voice of LGBTI plus Q plus communities, and we have been addressing the voice of HIV, people living with HIV, people living with disability. And yeah, we have been addressing everyone, and we are requesting to government, and we are taking this voice of them to the government to take some actions. And yeah, for sure we'll need a lot of patience over here, but still, despite of all of these situations, we have been working hard to be together. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, SRHR. It's nothing short of inspiring and really quite mind-blowing that youth advocates like yourself and organizations are still continuing their work despite all the restrictions and still successfully bringing the services that are so critically required. From there, I have a last question for Salai. Salai, what you shared was just so insightful. What do you feel governments can do to be much more gender responsive through the COVID-19 response and recovery, and more widely in advancing gender equality from your expertise?
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you for the question. Well, for us here in Fiji, one thing that the National Women's Machinery has embarked on, I guess one of the panelists spoke about transformative agenda. And for us here in Fiji, that's really what we is one of our big initiatives with the whole of government approach in transformative institutional capacity development. And in order for us to be able to have a whole of government approach, this was critical for us. And we're piloting 9 agencies in Fiji at the moment to have this transformative institutional capacity, gender transformative institutional capacity development. So that would be one way where we could see that there's a coordinated effort. And in doing this, it's not just the National Women's Machinery conducting short-term training and awareness programs, but actually developing officers within these agencies to have that gender perspective in conducting gender mainstreaming and looking at their programs and policies that would support the empowerment of women and gender equality. And we've focused on quite a number of key agencies across government, starting with and looking at the various sectors. So that is one way that we feel, and of course, not only that as whole of government, but also strengthening the consultation and collaboration, as I mentioned in my panel discussion, the collaboration and consultation with CSOs and NGOs, and having them as critical partners in the work that we undertake. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Salai. I think the fact that you've mentioned 9 pilot agencies in Fiji really speaks to the level of commitment to a gender-actuated response to the pandemic. Thank you once again to our panelists. Your insights have really helped frame the action areas and commitments across the board. I really wish we had actually more time to allocate for this discussion, but stay conscious of the time factor. I'll now declare our panel sessions closed. Thank you once again, speakers. It's been an absolute pleasure having you share your insights and expertise with us. Ladies and gentlemen, moving on now into the last segment of today's program for the dialogue, we now have joining us none other than Bjorn Anderson, Regional Director for UNFPA APRO, to deliver the closing remarks for today's dialogue session. I would also like to remind all our attendees to still please stay logged on after this entire closing is also done, because we would love to take a group picture with all of you. Thank you so much. Bjorn, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon from Bangkok. And Your Excellency, distinguished panelists, colleagues and friends joining us from around the Asia Pacific region today, thank you so much for your inspiring energy and dedication to realizing girls' and women's rights to make choices about their own bodies. As our esteemed panel, and those of you contributing online have illustrated so eloquently, bodily autonomy and decision-making power over sexual and reproductive health and access to essential information and services is a fundamental human right we are all born with. And yet, unacceptably, far too many girls and women are denied these basic birthrights. Specifically, as UNFPA's new State of World Population report shows, at least 40% of women and girls in the Asia-Pacific region are robbed of the rights to make simple but extremely consequential choices about their own bodies, about sex, contraception, and health care. This violates rights to bodily autonomy, the power and agency to make choices about our own bodies without fear of violence or coercion. It also violates rights to bodily integrity, which is the ability for people to live free from physical acts to which they do not consent. These all too pervasive realities are underpinned and perpetuated by gender inequality, a profound and persistent norm we must do everything in our power to disrupt. UNFPA has long been working with governments, civil society, and UN partners in Asia and the Pacific to tackle these challenges. Our UNFPA supplies program has been providing essential family planning commodities to developing countries, helping women and couples to choose when or if to have children. Our maternal health programs encourage governments to invest in and professionalize midwifery, better ensuring safe pregnancy and childbirth, and reducing maternal mortality. Our partnership with UNICEF to end child marriage and female genital mutilation are showing significant results, as is our partnership with UN Women under the so-called Unite Working Group to tackle the scourge of gender-based violence. And we bring all of these issues together in our humanitarian response interventions for women and girls impacted in the worst, most disaster-prone region. But we cannot and do not work alone. And that's why today, on behalf of UNFPA and International Planned Parenthood Federation and our partners like Arrow, we are honored to convene such an inspirational change makers, including those of you participating online. Together, we represent a multilateral cross-section of actors needed to finally put an end to these violations. From government, civil society, feminists and youth activists, to the UN family, private sector and beyond, we must continue collaborating and holding one another accountable. Collectively, it takes all of our unwavering commitments to be sure that girls and women can make choices about their own bodies. It is with this goal that UNFPA and IPPF, along with France and many other partners, are helping lead the way as co-conveners of the new Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. This platform enables us to come together in solidarity to advance the centrality of gender equality in addressing key issues such as integrated sexual and reproductive health services, comprehensive sexuality education, both in and out of school, harmful practices, and adolescent girls and women's decision-making power. This Action Coalition and today's dialogue stems from the Generation Equality Forum that also builds on the landmark program of action born at the 1994 International Conference on Population and Development, or ICPD. And may the Generation Equality Forum and Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights inspire all of us to do even more of what we are doing here today, and within our respective spheres of influence and the communities with which we work. Ultimately, a woman who has control over her body and access to sexual and reproductive health information and services is more likely to be empowered in other ways too. She gains not only in terms of autonomy, but also in her health and emotional well-being, education, income, and safety. She is more likely to thrive, and so is her family, her community, and country. And UNFPA is fully committed to co-leading efforts in realizing this important goal in Asia and the Pacific, together with our partners. And thank you for taking this journey with us, so all people, including women and girls, can say loud and clear, my body is my own. Thank you so much, and over back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bjorn. An excellent summation and reminder of the power of choice and the urgency of achieving gender equality through bodily autonomy and SRHR. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of today's Asia-Pacific Multi-Stakeholder Dialogue on Bodily Autonomy and Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. We have heard inspirational stories which help frame the aspirational goals of gender equality throughout our region. Thank you for making the time to join us in celebrating the power of activism, feminist solidarity, and youth leadership. And there is no force more transformative than empowering women and girls through bodily autonomy and SRHR. Just imagine 260 million more girls, adolescents, and women in all their diversity, making autonomous decisions about their bodies, sexuality, and reproduction by 2026 in at least 20 countries regionally. That is both the vision and the mission. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Tamina Khalji signing off for now. Here's to gender equality. Here's to generation equality.